I spent 11 years doing nothing else.
The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the streets of Seoul were still slick, still breathing cold mist into the night air like the city itself was holding something back. The limousine moved through the financial district the way expensive things always move, quietly, without apology, as if the road belonged to it. Inside, Han Ji-woon sat in the back seat with his jacket still buttoned, a tablet balanced on his knee, scrolling through acquisition documents he had already memorized. He was 29 years old, worth more than most countries' annual budgets, and absolutely, completely alone. He did not notice the driver at first. That was the thing about Naomi Brooks. Nobody ever noticed her at first. She sat in the front seat with both hands on the wheel at exactly the 10 and 2 position, eyes moving between the road ahead and the 3 mirrors she had adjusted before they left the underground garage. She had been driving for 47 minutes. She had not spoken once. She had not turned on music. She had not asked Ji-woon if the temperature was comfortable. She had simply driven. And somewhere in that silence, Ji-woon had looked up from his tablet. He watched her hands. Relaxed but ready. He watched her eyes. Not wandering. Not distracted. He watched the way she slowed the vehicle 2 full seconds before a pedestrian stepped off the curb 3 blocks ahead, a pedestrian Ji-woon himself had not seen yet. He was about to say something when she spoke first. "Sir," Naomi said quietly, "we have a problem." Ji-woon straightened. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that doesn't announce itself." She did not raise her voice. She did not tighten her grip on the wheel. Her eyes stayed on the mirror on her left, and Ji-woon followed her gaze without thinking. 3 black SUVs. 1 behind them. 2 emerging from side streets ahead, positioning themselves with the kind of geometric precision that had nothing to do with traffic and everything to do with intention. The limousine slowed. Not because Naomi was afraid. Because she was thinking. Ji-woon's hand moved toward his phone. "I'll call." "Not yet," she said. "Excuse me. If you call right now, whoever is on the other end of that phone will know exactly where we are and exactly how scared you are." She glanced at him once in the rearview mirror. Just once. "We don't want that." The SUVs completed their formation. The road ahead was blocked. The road behind was sealed. Masked men stepped out from the vehicles carrying rifles, moving slowly, like men who had done this before and expected no resistance. One of them smiled. Ji-woon felt something cold move through his chest. He had faced boardroom threats. He had survived hostile takeover attempts. He had sat across from men who wanted to destroy everything his parents had built. But this was different. This was something his money could not negotiate with. He looked at his driver. Naomi reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror with 1 finger. Then she reached down and locked every door in a single quiet motion. Then she pulled on her gloves, thin, fitted, already on her hands, and tightened them at the wrist. "Whatever happens," she said, "do not open that door." "Who are you?" Ji-woon asked, and his voice came out smaller than he intended. Naomi did not answer immediately. She was studying the men outside. Counting. Measuring the space between the SUVs. Calculating the angle of the side street to her right, a narrow maintenance road she had noticed on their way in and stored without effort the way she stored everything. Quietly, completely, without anyone knowing. "You've done this before," Ji-woon said. It wasn't a question anymore. She looked at him in the mirror one more time. And she smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a forced one. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who has already decided what happens next and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "I spent 11 years doing nothing else." She shifted the vehicle into reverse. The man outside raised his weapon. "And the story you think you are about to watch, the one about a billionaire in danger, about a corporate conspiracy, about power and greed and a company worth billions, that story is not the real story. The real story is about a mother. And what a mother is willing to survive." Cut to 3 weeks earlier. But before we go there, pause for just a moment, because this story is going to travel. Somewhere right now, someone is watching this from a city we have never visited, from a life we know nothing about, from a corner of the world that deserves to be seen. If that is you, drop your location in the comments. It does not have to be your full address, just your city, your country, wherever home is. We genuinely want to know how far these stories reach. And if nobody has told you to subscribe yet, consider this your sign. Now, let us go back 3 weeks, to the morning everything began. The apartment on Mapo-gu's outer edge was the kind of place that apologized for itself. The hallway light had been flickering for 6 weeks. The elevator worked on Tuesdays and sometimes Thursdays. The walls were thin enough that Naomi Brooks could hear her neighbor's television through the plaster every night, which meant she never needed her own. She was awake before the alarm. She was always awake before the alarm. It was a habit she had never been able to break, the way her body refused to surrender completely to sleep, the way some part of her brain stayed on, listening, measuring, the way it had been trained to do in places she never talked about anymore. She lay still for a moment in the gray morning dark and listened to the sound of her son breathing in the next room, and that sound, soft, steady, entirely unbothered by the world, was the only sound that had ever made her feel completely safe. Ethan was 10 years old, and he slept like he had no idea how hard his mother was working to protect that peace. She got up. The kitchen was small enough that she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms. She made 2 cups of instant coffee, drank one standing at the window watching the street below wake up, and left the second cooling on the counter for a version of herself that never quite arrived. She had 40 minutes before Ethan needed to be up. She used 15 of them reviewing the job application she had submitted 4 days ago and heard nothing back from, and the remaining 25 making breakfast from what was left in the refrigerator, which was not much. She was scrambling the last 2 eggs when her phone rang. The number was from Ethan's school. She knew before she answered. Ms. Brooks. The administrator's voice was careful, the way voices get when people are delivering news they have delivered before and still haven't found a comfortable way to say. I'm calling about Ethan's enrollment status. The outstanding balance on his account. We've sent 3 notices now, and I'm afraid if we don't receive payment by end of the month, we'll have to. I understand, Naomi said. Ms. Brooks, he's a wonderful student. We don't want to. I understand, she said again. I'll handle it. She ended the call and stood very still for a moment with her hand flat on the counter. Then she turned the stove off, plated the eggs, and went to wake her son. Ethan Brooks woke up the way he did everything, immediately and completely, as if sleep was simply a place he visited and had no trouble leaving. He sat up, looked at his mother, and said, Is everything okay? He was 10. He should not have been asking that question with that much precision in his eyes. Everything is fine, Naomi said. Eat your breakfast. You have 15 minutes. He studied her for a second the way children study the parents they know too well. Then he let it go, the way he always let it go, and climbed out of bed. She had borrowed the blazer from her neighbor, Mrs. Kim, who was 63 and had excellent taste and asked no questions. It was dark navy, fitted, and it made Naomi look exactly like what she needed to look like that morning, someone who belonged in a room she had never been invited to. The Hanul Group headquarters was 40 minutes by train and another 12 minutes on foot, and she arrived with 8 minutes to spare, which she used standing outside the building looking up at it the way she had taught herself not to do, like someone who was impressed. She was not impressed. She was calculating. The lobby security had 3 visible cameras, and 2 she suspected were hidden in the ceiling fixtures. The main entrance had 2 guards, one of whom was watching the door and one of whom was watching his phone. The revolving door had a pressure sensor that was slightly misaligned. She noticed it when the man ahead of her entered and the door stuttered for half a second longer than it should have. She filed all of it away and went inside. The security applicants were gathered in a waiting area on the 4th floor. There were 11 of them. 8 men, 2 other women, and Naomi. The men size her up the way men in that industry always did, with a quick scan that started at her shoulders and ended at her shoes and concluded in about 2 seconds that she was not serious competition. One of them, a broad man in a gray suit with the posture of someone who had worked private security for a long time and had begun to confuse visibility with competence, actually laughed when she walked in. Not at something funny. At her. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. Director Kwan entered the room 20 minutes later. He was a compact man in his mid-50s with a kind of stillness that comes from spending decades in environments where stillness is a survival skill. He had a file folder under his arm and reading glasses he had not yet put on, and the expression of a man who had conducted this interview enough times to know within the first 30 seconds whether he was wasting his time. He looked at the room. His gaze passed over the broad man in the gray suit, paused briefly on one of the other women, and then landed on Naomi and stayed there for just a fraction of a second longer than it stayed anywhere else. He sat down. "We are looking," he said, "for a personal security driver for the Chief Executive Officer of Hanul Group. This is not a standard driving position. You will be responsible for route planning, threat assessment, emergency evasion, and the physical safety of the most important person in this organization. I am going to describe a scenario, and I want each of you to tell me what you would do." He described a scenario. A VIP vehicle caught in congested traffic with a suspicious vehicle maintaining a consistent following distance. The broad man in the gray suit answered first. He talked about calling the police. He talked about accelerating through traffic. He talked for nearly 2 minutes and said almost nothing. Several others answered. Their answers were variations of the same response: escalate, alert, escape. Reasonable. Trained. Predictable. Kwon looked at Naomi. "Ms. Brooks. Before I answer," she said, "I'd like to ask something." The room shifted slightly. Nobody asked things in these interviews. That was not how these interviews worked. Kwon looked at her steadily. "Go ahead." The vehicle parked in the executive bay, level 2, the black SUV registered to your secondary convoy unit. The rear left tire has an emergency sealant insert that expired 8 months ago. The driver's side mirror is adjusted for someone approximately 4 inches taller than your current primary driver, which means response angles during a left-side approach are compromised. There are 4 surveillance cameras covering the executive entrance, but the one mounted above the third pillar from the left has been rotated approximately 12 degrees off its optimal angle, probably during a cleaning cycle that nobody corrected, which means there's a blind spot roughly 2 meters wide at the base of the stairwell. Silence. Complete silence. "I noticed these things between the lobby and this room," she said. "If you want to know what I would do in your scenario, I would tell you that the scenario you described would never happen to a vehicle I was responsible for, because I would have already identified the threat 3 routes earlier and we would not have been in that traffic to begin with." Director Kwon looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed his folder. "Wait here," he said. "Everyone else, thank you for your time." Han Ji-woon arrived at the vehicle assessment 40 minutes later, which was 20 minutes later than scheduled, which Naomi noted without expression. He was younger than she had expected. Photographs did not communicate the particular quality of his presence. The combination of obvious intelligence and what looked, at first glance, like arrogance but was, on closer inspection, simply the focused impatience of someone whose time had been genuinely, consistently wasted by people who didn't think as fast as he did. He walked to the limousine, glanced at it, and got in the back. Naomi did not get in. Ji-woon looked up from his phone. "We're leaving." "We're not," she said. He stared at her through the open door. "The vehicle isn't safe," she said. "The expired sealant insert I mentioned to Director Kwon. If you want to take it out of the bay, I can't stop you, but I won't be driving it." A silence stretched between them that had weight in it. Then Ji-woon said, "Kwon." "Sir." "Fix it." "Sir, she's an applicant, she hasn't been." "Fix it." He looked back at his phone. "And hire her." That was a Tuesday. By Thursday morning, Naomi Brooks had a badge, a parking assignment, a vehicle that she had spent 4 hours going over with the kind of attention that left the mechanics who assisted her slightly unsettled and deeply impressed, and a job that paid enough to clear Ethan's school balance with a small amount left over. She did not celebrate. She never celebrated. She noted it, filed it, moved forward. The first week was observation. That was always how she worked. You do not understand an environment by asking questions. You understand it by watching what happens when nobody thinks they are being watched. She learned the schedules, not the official ones posted on the shared calendar, but the real ones, the rhythms that people fall into without noticing. She learned which employees arrived early and which arrived exactly on time. She learned which ones used the side entrance. She learned which security guard took his coffee break at the same 12-minute window every morning and which one varied his routine unpredictably, which made him better at the job and also more interesting to her. She drove Ji-woon to 3 board meetings, 1 dinner, and a charity event in the first week and said a combined total of perhaps 40 words to him across all 5 trips. He noticed. Most drivers filled silence. They offered commentary on traffic, on the weather, on whatever they imagined a billionaire might want to talk about. Naomi offered nothing. She drove. She watched. She delivered him where he needed to go and had the vehicle ready for departure before he finished his final handshake. On the fourth day, Ji-woon said, "You don't talk much." "No, sir. Most people can't stop talking around me." "Most people are talking to your position," she said. "I don't have anything to say to your position." He was quiet for a moment. Then something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face and was gone. "Fair enough," he said. By the second week, she had begun noticing things she was not supposed to notice. The first was the vehicle. A gray sedan, mid-range, the kind of car specifically chosen to be forgettable. She had seen it 3 times in 4 days. Once outside headquarters. Once near the restaurant where Ji-woon had his Thursday dinner. Once on the approach road to the private airfield they used for domestic travel. 3 different locations. Same vehicle. Same distance, always close enough to observe, always far enough to deny. She said nothing. Not yet. The second thing was the schedule changes. 3 times in 2 weeks, Ji-woon's route had been altered by someone in the logistics chain, not by Naomi, not by Director Kwon, and not by Ji-woon himself. Minor alterations. 15 minutes here. A different entrance there. Small enough to explain away. Consistent enough to be a pattern. She started keeping a private log on a notebook she carried in her inside jacket pocket, written in a shorthand she had developed years ago that looked, to anyone who found it, like grocery lists. The third thing was Daniel Park. Deputy Security Director Park was 38, efficient, well-dressed, and present at every security briefing with the kind of precise punctuality that Naomi had learned, over many years in environments where people were hiding things, to find slightly suspicious. Competent people were rarely that consistent. Consistency at that level required effort. Effort required motivation. She watched him the way she watched everything, without appearing to watch at all. She was in the security monitoring room on a Wednesday afternoon, running her standard end-of-day vehicle check on the system, when she noticed the footage gap. 12 minutes, between 2:14 and 2:26 p.m., from the camera covering the east parking level. Not corrupted. Not malfunctioning. Gone. Cleanly removed. She checked the system log. The deletion had been authorized with Director Kwon's access credentials. She found Director Kwon in his office 20 minutes later. "The east-level footage from this afternoon," she said. He looked up. "What about it?" "It's missing." He frowned. "I didn't authorize any deletion." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. Something slower and more serious than surprise. He leaned back in his chair and studied her with the particular attention of a man who has just realized that the person standing in front of him sees considerably more than he initially gave them credit for. "How long?" he said. "The pattern or the specific incident?" "Both." "Pattern, 2 weeks. The footage today." He was quiet for a moment. "You kept records." "I keep records of everything." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, very carefully, "Ms. Brooks, what exactly is your background?" She met his eyes. "You have my file, sir. Your file tells me you did 8 years of logistics coordination and 3 years of private transport prior to applying here." He paused. "Your file is very clean. Professionally clean. The kind of clean that takes effort." She said nothing. "I'm going to ask again," he said. "Not as your supervisor. As someone who is beginning to understand that this building may have a problem and I may need someone I can trust." He folded his hands on the desk. "What is your background, Ms. Brooks?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. 11 years, she said. Special operations. 4 deployments. 2 of them classified. I left when my son was born and my husband died, and I have not discussed it with anyone since." Director Kwon did not move for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "God help us." And Naomi, for just a fraction of a second, almost smiled. The gray sedan appeared again on a Friday morning, and this time Naomi was ready for it. She had told no one she was changing the route. Not Kwon. Not Park. Not the logistics coordinator. She had filed the standard route in the system the night before, and then, alone in the garage at 5 a.m. before anyone else arrived, she had planned an entirely different path. Not written down, not entered anywhere, existing only in her head. The sedan appeared 12 minutes into the drive. Same vehicle. Same distance. Same practiced patience. She drove the rest of the route without changing her expression and delivered Ji-woon to his morning meeting on time. On the return trip, she took a route that passed the building's underground maintenance entrance and swept the undercarriage of the vehicle at the security checkpoint. The tracker was magnetic, compact, military-grade, and attached to the rear axle housing in a position specifically chosen to survive a standard sweep. She removed it, placed it in a small evidence bag she kept in the vehicle's utility compartment, and drove the rest of the way in silence. In the security office that evening, she placed the bag on Director Kwan's desk without a word. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. Then he picked up his phone and made a call she was not present for. The next morning, Ji-woon's security clearance system flagged a request for Naomi's full background. Somebody had submitted the request through official channels, which meant the results would come back through official channels, which meant everybody in the senior security team would see them at the same time. She found out when Ji-woon called her into his office. He was standing at the window when she entered, looking out at the city with his hands in his pockets, and he waited until she closed the door before he turned around. "Special operations," he said. "Yes, sir." "For deployments." "Yes, sir." "Highest commendations in your service record." He paused. "Why didn't you tell me?" She considered the question the way she considered everything, without rushing. "Because the job didn't require it," she said. "And because I spent 11 years being defined by what I could do in a crisis. I wanted to find out if I could be useful without anyone knowing." Ji-woon looked at her for a long moment. He was quiet in a way that felt thoughtful rather than awkward. "My parents died in a car accident," he said, and the sentence arrived so unexpectedly that it took her a half-second to adjust. 3 years ago. The investigation concluded it was road conditions. Black ice. Wrong place, wrong time. He turned back to the window. "I have never entirely believed that." Naomi said nothing. She let the silence hold what he had put into it. "I am telling you this," he said, "because I think you are the first person in this building who is actually here to keep me safe rather than to manage the appearance of keeping me safe." He looked at her. "Am I wrong?" "No, sir," she said. He nodded once. "Then I need you to keep doing whatever you've been doing. And I need you to tell me everything." She told him about the sedan, about the schedule changes, about the footage, about the tracker. She did not tell him about Daniel Park, not yet. Not until she was certain. She had been in enough situations where acting on suspicion before confirmation cost lives to have learned the difference between instinct and evidence. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" he asked. "Time," she said. "And for you to trust that I will tell you when I know something rather than when I suspect it." He considered this. "All right," he said. She was 3 steps from the door when his voice stopped her. "Ms. Brooks." She turned. "Why did you really leave the military?" The question landed softly, but it had weight behind it, the weight of genuine curiosity from someone who was beginning to understand that the answer mattered. She looked at him for a moment. "My son asked me to come home," she said. "So I came home." She left the office, and Ji-woon stood at the window for a long time after she was gone, looking at the city and thinking about what it meant to have someone who would actually come home when someone needed them to. That evening, Naomi sat on the edge of Ethan's bed after he had fallen asleep and watched him breathe. The toy robot on his shelf, old, slightly worn, a gift from his father that Ethan had carried through every apartment, every city, every beginning, caught the light from the hallway in a small dull gleam. She looked at it for a moment. Something about it made her chest ache in a way she did not have words for and had stopped trying to find them. She turned off the light and went to the kitchen and sat at the table with her notebook open and wrote nothing for a long time. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered on the second ring and said nothing. A voice said, "He's wearing the blue backpack today. He stopped at the corner store on Yeonam-dong for 12 minutes after school. He bought a banana milk and a pack of pencils." He smiled at the woman behind the counter. Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. The voice continued. He's safe tonight, Ms. Brooks. Whether he stays safe depends entirely on you. Tomorrow morning, you will drive exactly where you are told. You will not deviate. You will not alert Director Kwon. You will not contact anyone. If you do any of those things, the boy with the blue backpack will have a very different kind of day. The line went dead. She sat completely still for 47 seconds. She counted them. Then she put the phone down on the table very carefully, the way you put something down when your hands are not entirely steady and you need them to be, and she looked at the wall across from her, and she thought. Not about fear. Fear was a visitor she had learned to receive without letting inside. She thought about information. About what the call told her. About what it assumed she would do and what she would actually do instead. About who knew enough about Ethan's daily routine to describe it in real time. About who, of all the people circling this situation, had the most to lose. And she thought about the fact that only 3 people now knew tomorrow's route. Ji-woon, Director Kwon, herself. She reached for her notebook. And she began to write. She did not sleep that night. Not because she was afraid. Fear was something she had metabolized a long time ago, broken down into its components, stripped of its power to paralyze. She did not sleep because sleep was a luxury that belonged to people who did not have a 10-year-old boy with a blue backpack and a banana milk habit and a father who was already gone, and she refused to let the world take anything else from her son without a fight it would remember. She sat at the kitchen table until 3 a.m. with her notebook and a cold cup of coffee, and she built a picture. Not of what she knew. Of what she was supposed to believe. Because there was a difference, and the difference was everything. She was supposed to believe this was about Ji-woon. About Hanul Group. About a corporate takeover and a billionaire and a company worth more than most governments could comfortably imagine. That was the story everyone was telling. That was the story the suspicious sedan told, and the missing footage told, and the tracker on the rear axle told. It was a clean story. A logical one. But something underneath it refused to settle. She thought about her husband. Marcus Brooks had been a quiet man who loved loud music and made the best jollof rice she had ever tasted, and spent the last 18 months of his life investigating something he would not tell her about. Not because he didn't trust her. Because he knew that what you don't know cannot be taken from you. He had told her that once, sitting on the floor of their old apartment with Ethan asleep between them, and she had thought he was being dramatic. He died on a Tuesday. Car accident, the report said. Wrong place, wrong time. Black ice. She had heard that explanation before. She pushed the thought away. Not because it wasn't relevant. She was beginning to suspect it was the most relevant thing in the room, but because she needed to focus on tomorrow, and tomorrow needed her mind clean and sharp and uncluttered by grief she had already survived once and had no intention of surviving again. At 3:47 a.m. she made a decision. She would drive exactly where she was told. But she would not drive the way they expected. The morning arrived gray and cold, the sky the color of old concrete, the kind of Seoul morning that feels like the city is bracing itself. Naomi was in the garage at 5 a.m. She checked the vehicle with the systematic patience of someone who understood that the difference between a car and a coffin was often nothing more than 20 minutes of proper preparation. She checked the tires, the fluid levels, the emergency equipment, the communication systems. She checked the undercarriage again herself. She removed 2 components from the GPS tracking system that would prevent real-time location broadcasting to the standard network, but activated a separate satellite beacon that only transmitted to one receiver, a frequency she had not used in 4 years, belonging to a man she trusted more than almost anyone alive. Commander O would know what to do with the signal. She picked Ji-woon up at 7:15. He was already in the lobby when she arrived, which meant he had been waiting, which meant he was nervous, which meant he understood more about this morning than she had told him. She respected that. Smart people felt the air before the storm and did not pretend otherwise. He got in the vehicle and said nothing. She pulled out of the bay and said, "There may be a situation this morning." "I know," he said. "I need you to do exactly what I say, when I say it, without asking why." A pause. "I understand. And I need you to trust me." Another pause, shorter this time. "I already do." She drove. For 18 minutes, everything was ordinary. Traffic. Gray sky. The city moving around them the way cities move, indifferent, continuous, swallowing individual moments without noticing them. She watched the mirrors. She watched the side streets. She drove the route she had been given with the steady, unhurried pace of someone following instructions. They appeared at the 19-minute mark. 3 black SUVs. The formation was different from what she had anticipated. 1 ahead, 2 from side streets converging simultaneously, which meant someone with tactical training had designed this, which told her something important about who was really running things. This was not the work of corporate security gone rogue. This was professional. Military-grade professional. The vehicles sealed the road. Masked men stepped out. Ji-woon's breath caught behind her. "Eyes forward," she said quietly. "Don't look at them directly. Look at me in the mirror." He found her eyes in the rear view. "Good," she said. "Stay there." She took one slow breath. The man directly ahead raised his weapon. Another one, to the left, began walking toward the vehicle with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once been surprised by how these encounters ended. He had never met Naomi Brooks. She shifted into reverse at an angle that used the SUV behind them as a pivot point, swinging the rear of the limousine hard left into the narrow service road she had identified on the way in, a maintenance access corridor between 2 commercial buildings, wide enough for the vehicle by approximately 14 inches on each side and completely absent from the standard navigation system because it was not, technically, a road. It was a gap. The kind of gap that only existed in the map she kept inside her head. The scrape of the side mirror against the concrete wall was loud. Ji-woon gripped the door handle without opening it. The men behind them scrambled. She heard shouting. Heard engines. Heard the particular sound of a tactical situation falling apart at its edges when the target does not behave the way it was supposed to. She drove. The maintenance corridor opened onto a lower service road that connected to the old port district, a tangle of narrow streets and decommissioned loading zones that had been half-developed and then abandoned during a zoning dispute 3 years ago. She knew it because she had driven every forgotten road within 12 kilometers of their standard routes in her first 2 weeks on the job, alone, before work, at hours when no one would ask what she was doing or why. She disabled the primary communication systems at the 4-minute mark. She activated the satellite beacon at the 4-minute 30-second mark. She reached the coastal access road at the 11-minute mark and pulled off onto an unmarked track that descended toward a cluster of low buildings on the water's edge, an old Coast Guard relay station, decommissioned, officially unoccupied, and belonging, through a chain of quiet paperwork she had filed 18 months ago under a name that was not her own, to Commander O. She stopped the vehicle. The silence after the engine cut was enormous. Ji-woon released the door handle. His knuckles were white. He looked at the back of her head for a moment, then at the buildings outside, then back at her. "Are we safe?" he asked. "For now," she said. "Get inside. Stay away from the windows." Commander O was already there. He was 61 years old, built like a man who had once been formidable and had simply never stopped, with white hair cut close and the particular economy of movement that belonged to people who had spent decades in situations where unnecessary motion was a liability. He looked at Naomi when she walked in and nodded once, the way old soldiers greet each other, briefly, completely, without performance. "You took your time," he said. "Traffic," she said. Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face. Ji-woon stood in the doorway looking between them with the expression of a man rapidly revising his understanding of the situation he was in, the woman he had hired, and possibly the nature of the universe. "Who is he?" Ji-woon asked. "Someone you can trust," Naomi said. "Right now that is a short list, so I'd hold on to it." She took Ji-woon's phone. He opened his mouth. "Spyware," she said. "Military grade. Whoever installed it has been reading every message, tracking every location, and listening to every call made within 3 meters of this device for," she checked the installation signature, "at least 6 weeks." Ji-woon stared at the phone in her hand as if it had become something he did not recognize. "Who installed it?" She set the phone on the table face down. "Someone with physical access to your device and enough technical clearance to install something this clean without triggering your security systems." She looked at him carefully. "Someone inside." The name sat between them unspoken for a moment. "Daniel Park." Ji-woon sat down heavily in the nearest chair. He pressed both hands flat on his knees and looked at the floor and said nothing for almost a full minute. When he looked up, his eyes had changed, not broken, but stripped of something, some final layer of the assumption that the people around him were who they appeared to be. "Tell me everything," he said. "Everything you haven't told me yet." So she did. She told him about the surveillance pattern, the footage deletion, the route changes, the tracker. She told him about Daniel Park's access credentials appearing in system logs at times when Park was supposedly elsewhere. She told him about the call to her phone, the voice describing Ethan's afternoon in real time, the threat delivered with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed it. And then she told him what she suspected but had not yet confirmed, that this was not entirely about Hanul Group. That the company, the takeover, the shipping terminals, all of it was real, but it was not the center. That somewhere underneath the corporate conspiracy was something older and something worse. Ji-woon listened to all of it and then said, "My uncle." She looked at him. "Chairman Han Sung-min. He has been pushing for the sale of the shipping terminals for 8 months. The buyer is hidden behind 3 layers of shell corporations. I know because I had Attorney Lee investigate when the deal was first proposed and she couldn't get to the bottom of it." He paused. "I blocked the sale." He was furious in the way that very controlled people are furious, completely invisible on the surface. He looked at his hands. "He was my father's brother. After my parents died, he was the one who came to the funeral. The one who stood beside me. I thought—" He stopped. "You thought he was grieving," Naomi said. "I thought he was grieving." Commander O, who had been standing quietly near the window, said, "The terminals. What are they actually moving?" Ji-woon looked at him. "Shipping containers. Electronics components, primarily. That's what the manifest says." "And what does Attorney Lee think the manifests are covering?" A silence. "She hasn't said it directly," Ji-woon said slowly. "But she used the word irregular 3 times in our last conversation and then changed the subject." He looked at Naomi. "What do you think they're moving?" She had been thinking about this since the moment in Act 6 when the numbers stopped adding up, since the moment she had looked at the terminal valuations and understood that no legitimate electronic shipping operation generated the kind of profit margin that justified what Chairman Han was willing to do to acquire it. "I think the terminals are a transit point," she said. "I think the electronics are real. They need the legitimate volume to justify the infrastructure. But I think running alongside the legitimate freight is something that has nothing to do with electronics and everything to do with why several governments in 3 different countries would pay a very large amount of money to make sure it keeps moving without anyone looking too closely." The room was very quiet. "We need Attorney Lee," Ji-woon said. "Carefully," Naomi said. "Phones are compromised. Movement is monitored. If Lee shows up at a corporate office asking the wrong questions tonight, someone will know before she finishes the sentence." Commander O said, "I have a secure line." Naomi looked at him. He shrugged the way he always shrugged when he offered something that had cost him considerably to arrange, without ceremony, without wanting acknowledgement. She had served under 3 commanding officers in 11 years. O was the only one she had never once doubted. "Use it," she said. Attorney Lee arrived 2 hours later in a car that belonged to a cousin and was wearing clothes that did not belong to her and carrying a hard drive that she placed on the table without preamble and said, "I have been trying to find a way to show someone this for 11 days. I was beginning to think I had run out of options." The ownership records went back 6 years. The shell corporations dissolved and reformed in patterns designed to exhaust investigation, but Lee had followed the money the way forensic accountants follow money, with the patience of someone who understands that no matter how many layers you add, the bottom always exists. At the bottom of the Hanul terminal acquisition was a holding company registered in 3 jurisdictions simultaneously, controlled by a board of directors that existed entirely on paper, funded by a capital source that Lee had traced to a financial network flagged by Interpol in connection with an international trafficking and smuggling operation that had been active for over a decade. The terminals were not moving electronics. They were moving people. The silence in the room after Lee finished presenting the documents was the heaviest silence Naomi had experienced since a particular evening in a particular country she was not permitted to name, when she and 4 other operators had understood simultaneously that the situation they were in was considerably worse than the briefing had suggested. Ji-woon stood up and walked to the window and stood with his back to the room for almost 2 minutes. When he turned around, his face had settled into something that was not anger exactly, something colder and more permanent than anger. "What do we do?" he said. Naomi had been waiting for this moment. Not with satisfaction, There was nothing satisfying about the shape of what they were dealing with. But with the particular readiness that comes from spending a long time preparing for something and finally arriving at the moment when preparation becomes action. "We do not run," she said. "Running confirms everything they want the story to say about us. The media is already reporting that I took you against your will. That story is live right now, and Chairman Han is almost certainly the one who planted it." She looked at Ji-woon steadily. "We give them the opposite of what they expect. We walk back into the board meeting," Ji-woon said slowly. "Tomorrow morning. You were never kidnapped. You were never missing. You were conducting a personal security review following a credible threat against your life, which is entirely true and entirely documentable." She looked at Lee. "How solid is the ownership trail?" "Solid enough for a criminal investigation," Lee said. "Not solid enough alone to survive a courtroom if Han has the lawyers I think he has." "We need more," Naomi said. "We need the encrypted files." And it was in that moment, sitting at a table in an old Coast Guard station with rain beginning again outside and the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing down on the room, that something moved in the back of Naomi's mind. A memory. Small and specific and arriving without warning the way the important ones always did. Her husband. Repairing the toy robot. The night before he died. She had come into Ethan's room at past midnight and found Marcus sitting on the floor with a robot in his lap and a small screwdriver in his hand, and she had said, "Marcus, it's late," and he had looked up at her with an expression she had filed away without understanding. Relief, she realized now. Not the relief of finishing something. The relief of finishing something important. She stood up so quickly that Lee stopped mid-sentence. "Ms. Brooks," Commander O said. Her mind was moving very fast. The syndicate had been searching for Marcus's evidence for years. His investigation. The final encrypted drive he had never been able to deliver before he was killed. She had assumed it was lost. She had assumed whoever killed him had found it. She had grieved it the same way she had grieved him, completely, finally, and then moved forward because moving forward was what Ethan needed. But Marcus had known they were coming. He had known, and he had hidden it. Not in a bank. Not in a security deposit box. Not in any place a professional search would find, because Marcus had known professionals would be searching. He had hidden it somewhere that required you to know him, really know him, to think of looking. "I need to get to my son," she said. Her voice was completely level. That was how O knew it was serious. She never leveled her voice unless the alternative was something she would not permit. He was already moving toward the door. "I'll drive." Ethan was at Mrs. Kim's apartment, where Naomi had quietly arranged for him to stay 2 days ago under the explanation of a work emergency, which was true in every sense of the word. Mrs. Kim opened the door before they knocked. She had been watching from the window, and Ethan was sitting at her kitchen table doing homework with a focused, unhurried concentration he applied to everything, the robot on the table beside him because he carried it everywhere, had carried it everywhere since the week after his father died because it was one of the last things his father had touched. He looked up when his mother walked in. "Mom," he said. And then, reading her face with the accuracy that 10 years of careful observation had given him, "What happened?" "Nothing yet," she said. She crossed to the table and sat down across from him and looked at the robot. Old red plastic. One ear slightly melted from an incident involving a desk lamp that Ethan had cried about for a week and Marcus had laughed about for a month. A small panel on the back that covered the battery compartment, secured with a single screw. She picked it up. Ethan watched her. She turned it over. The screw was newer than the rest of the casing, not by much, a year or two, the kind of difference you would only notice if you were looking for it. She looked at O. He produced a small toolkit from his jacket pocket with the matter-of-fact preparedness of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by what situations required. She opened the panel. Inside, beneath the battery housing, fitted into a foam insert that had been placed there with the careful precision of someone who measured twice a drive. Flat, military grade, no larger than a thumbnail. The kind of drive that did not exist in any consumer catalog. The kind of drive that cost Marcus Brooks his life. Ethan looked at his mother's face and said, very quietly, "Dad put that there, didn't he?" It was not a question. Naomi looked at her son, at the 10-year-old boy who had carried his father's most dangerous secret for years inside his favorite toy without knowing, who had moved it from apartment to apartment, city to city, keeping it safe through the simple power of never letting it out of his sight, and she felt something break open in her chest in a way that was not grief and not relief but something larger than both of them put together. "Yes," she said. "He did." Ethan looked at the drive for a long moment. "Was Dad a spy?" "No," she said. "He was just a man who knew something was wrong and was trying to make it right. Like you." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "Like us," she said. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. They walked in at 9:03. Ji-woon entered first, which was important. His presence before any explanation, before any context, changed the architecture of the room immediately. Chairman Han Sung-min was already seated at the head of the table with the composed, mournful expression of a man who had spent the previous 18 hours carefully constructing a narrative of concern for his missing nephew. When Ji-woon walked through the door, something moved across Han's face, fast, involuntary, gone in less than a second. But Naomi was standing 4 feet behind Ji-woon and slightly to his left, and she caught it. Not relief. Calculation. Han rose from his seat. "Ji-woon. Thank God. We've been—" "Sit down, uncle," Ji-woon said. The room went very still. Han sat down. The board members, 12 of them, arranged around the long table with their tablets and their water glasses and their careful corporate faces, looked between Ji-woon and the chairman with the collective anxiety of people who understand that the ground beneath a situation has shifted but cannot yet tell in which direction. Director Kwon entered behind Naomi. Then Attorney Lee. Then 2 representatives from the Financial Crimes Division of the National Prosecutor's Office, who had been contacted through a secure channel at 4 a.m. and who had spent the intervening hours reviewing the documents Lee had transmitted and making a series of phone calls that had, in turn, initiated a set of parallel actions in 3 other countries. Daniel Park, seated midway down the table in his position as Deputy Security Director, looked at the prosecutors and then at Naomi and understood in approximately 1 second that the configuration of this room was not survivable. He stood up. "Sit down, Mr. Park," said Naomi. He looked at her. She looked back at him with a particular quality of stillness that had once made grown men in very dangerous situations reconsider their decisions. He sat down. Attorney Lee began with the ownership records. She was methodical and precise and entirely without drama, which made it worse. There is something uniquely devastating about financial crime presented without embellishment, the bare architecture of human greed exposed in rows of numbers and shell company names and wire transfer timestamps. She walked the room through 6 years of deliberate concealment in 40 minutes, and by the end of it, 3 of the 12 board members had removed their jackets and 1 had asked for water twice. Han sat through it with a stillness that Naomi recognized as the stillness of a man deciding between 2 very bad options. Then Director Kwon stood up and presented the security evidence, the spyware, the tracker, the footage deletions, Daniel Park's access credentials appearing in system logs with timestamps that placed him at his desk and inside restricted systems simultaneously. Park's composure dissolved layer by layer the way composure does when it was always a performance, not broken suddenly but revealed gradually, like a painting in rain. And then Naomi placed the drive on the table. She did not explain it immediately. She let it sit there, small, flat, unremarkable, while the room looked at it the way rooms look at objects that arrive without context. Then she looked at Han directly and said, "My husband spent the last year of his life documenting the operation your network runs through those terminals. He was killed before he could deliver the evidence. You spent years assuming the drive was destroyed or lost. It wasn't. It was inside a child's toy, in my son's bedroom, because Marcus knew that the one place your people would never think to look was somewhere that required you to understand what it means to be a father." The silence was absolute. "You didn't come after Ji-woon because of the company," she said. "You came after the company because you needed to lure me out. Because you believed if you created enough pressure around Hanul Group, eventually I would surface. Because I was the only person who might eventually find what Marcus hid." She let that land. "You were right about that. You were wrong about everything else." Han looked at her for a long moment across the length of the table. The composure was still there. She would give him that. It was extraordinary, the amount of control he maintained even now. But underneath it, in the precise set of his jaw and the particular quality of his stillness, she could see the moment a man accepts that the game is over. He did not confess. He did not apologize. He did not perform regret. He simply said, very quietly, "Your husband was a thorough man." "Yes," she said. "He was." The prosecutors moved at that point, with the efficient quiet of people exercising authority they have been conserving for exactly this moment. Han was taken into custody with a formality that somehow made it worse rather than better. No shouting, no resistance, simply the terrible dignity of consequences arriving. Daniel Park confessed before they finished reading him his rights. He spoke quickly and completely, the way people speak when the relief of stopping outweighs every other calculation, and what he said in that room sent immediate alerts to port authorities in 3 countries and initiated simultaneous raids on 7 facilities across 2 continents. Ji-woon watched it all from his position at the head of the table, his company, his inheritance from parents who had not died on black ice, with an expression that was grief and relief and anger and something else, something that did not have a clean name but looked, from a distance, like the beginning of clarity. The arrests took most of the morning. The raids took most of the day. Naomi gave her statement to investigators in a room with gray walls and a window overlooking the street, and a detective who kept glancing at her file with the expression of someone who has stopped being surprised by information and then keeps being surprised anyway. She told the truth, completely and in order, and she did not describe herself as brave or skilled or any of the things that were technically accurate and entirely beside the point. She described what she had seen, what she had done, and why she had done it. When they asked if she had anything to add, she thought for a moment. "My husband's name was Marcus Brooks," she said. "He died trying to stop this. I would like that to be part of the record." The detective wrote it down. The afternoon light was long and golden when she finally walked out of the building, the kind of light that Seoul produces in the late hours of clear days as if compensating for the gray mornings. Director Kwon was waiting outside. He fell into step beside her without preamble, the way people walk together when they have been through something that does not require narration. "Ji-woon wants to meet tomorrow," he said. "I know. He's going to offer you the directorship. Full security leadership. Everything that comes with it." "I know." They walked for a moment. "You're going to say no," Kwon said. "I'm going to say no." He was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask why?" She thought about Ethan doing homework at Mrs. Kim's table with the robot beside him. She thought about the school fees and the borrowed blazer and the thin walls and the flickering hallway light and every ordinary difficult piece of a life she was building one day at a time in a city that did not know her name. "Because my son doesn't need a hero," she said. "He needs a mother who comes home." Kwon nodded slowly. "What will you do?" "Consulting," she said. "Independent. My hours, my clients, my terms." She glanced at him sideways. "I'll probably call you." "Probably." "Definitely." Something that was entirely a smile crossed his face, which was remarkable because in her observation it was only the second time she had seen it. 6 months passed. The way good months pass, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular weight of time that is being used well. Naomi established her consultancy from the second bedroom of a new apartment, larger, better lit, with a hallway where the lights worked every day without exception. Ethan started a new school year with his fees paid in full and a teacher who sent home weekly reports describing him as exceptionally perceptive, which Naomi read and filed without showing him because she did not want it to go to his head. Ji-woon visited occasionally. Not as a client. Not as an employer. As someone who was learning, slowly and with considerable effort, what it meant to trust people rather than manage them, and who had identified Naomi as a person from whom this lesson could be absorbed simply by paying attention. He brought food when he came. Always too much. She always pretended to object and then ate most of it. Ethan liked him. Ji-woon was good with children in the unconscious way of people who have never stopped being slightly bewildered by the world themselves. He answered Ethan's questions directly, without condescension, and Ethan responded to this the way children respond to being taken seriously, which is to say completely and permanently. One afternoon Ji-woon arrived to find Ethan at the kitchen table with a toy robot in front of him, repaired now, the battery compartment housing a new panel that fit cleanly, and Ji-woon sat down across from him and looked at it for a moment and said, "Your father must have been an extraordinary person." Ethan considered this with the seriousness he gave everything. "He made really good rice," he said finally. "And he laughed at things that weren't funny. And he always fixed things instead of throwing them away." Ji-woon looked at the robot. "Yes," he said. "That does sound extraordinary. Naomi stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to this and did not say anything. Some moments do not need anything added to them. She had learned, over the long slow months of learning to breathe again, that peace did not arrive as a destination. It arrived as a series of ordinary afternoons, a boy doing homework, a table with too much food on it, a window with good light, the sound of a voice she loved talking without fear. She turned back to the kitchen. The case against Chairman Han and his network moved through international courts with the grinding patience of justice systems dealing with crimes that crossed too many borders to be resolved quickly. 3 governments were involved. 11 officials across 2 continents had been implicated. The full picture, as it emerged in pieces through legal proceedings and journalistic investigation, was larger and older and more intricate than even Naomi had suspected in that Coast Guard station with the rain starting outside. And then one evening, a Thursday, unremarkable in every respect except for what arrived, Naomi's phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She answered. A voice she had never heard said, "Ms. Brooks. We've been looking at the case files. There's a layer your investigators haven't found yet." A pause. Han wasn't running this operation. He was the middleman. The person above him. We believe they're already aware that the drive's contents have been shared with prosecutors. And we believe they are not finished. Naomi stood very still in her kitchen. "Who is this?" she said. "Someone who knew your husband," the voice said. "Someone who has been trying to finish what he started for a very long time." Another pause. "He left more than one drive, Ms. Brooks." The line went dead. She stood in the silence of her kitchen for a long time. Through the wall she could hear Ethan in his room, the small familiar sounds of a child moving through the last hour before sleep, a drawer opening, a book being set down, the specific creak of his mattress as he settled. She looked at the phone in her hand. Then she looked at the wall between her and her son. Then she put the phone face down on the counter, walked to Ethan's door, and knocked twice. "Come in," he said. She opened the door. He was already in bed, the robot on the shelf above him catching the lamplight the way it always did. He looked at her with the eyes that had always seen too much. "Everything okay?" he asked. She looked at her son for a long moment. "Everything is fine," she said. "Sleep." She turned off the light. She pulled the door almost closed. And she stood in the hallway in the dark, and she thought about a drive she did not have, in a location she did not know, hidden by a man who had understood something she was only beginning to, that the thing you are fighting is never entirely finished. That the people who traffic in darkness do not stop because one network falls. That Marcus had known this, had known it clearly enough to leave her more than one piece of the answer, and had trusted her enough to believe she would eventually be ready to find the rest. She was not afraid. She was something more complicated and more useful than afraid. She was ready. But tonight, Ethan was asleep. The apartment was warm. The hallway light worked. Somewhere across the city, Ji-woon was probably reading acquisition documents he had already memorized, and Director Kwan was probably running a security audit that did not need running, and Attorney Lee was probably following a money trail that led somewhere nobody wanted to go. And Naomi Brooks, former Special Operations, single mother, the woman nobody saw until it was too late, Naomi stood in her hallway and let the night be quiet for just a little longer. Tomorrow was coming. She would be ready for it. She always was. If this story reached you, if any part of Naomi's journey stayed with you, made you feel something real, then you already know this kind of storytelling does not happen by accident. It takes time, care, and an audience worth writing for. If you are part of that audience, do one simple thing. Hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which moment in this story hit you the hardest. Was it the toy robot? The boardroom? The phone call at the end? Every comment gets read. Every single one. And before you go, tell me what city you are watching from. It genuinely matters to know how far these stories travel. Until the next one, stay safe, stay grounded, and never underestimate the quiet ones.